listening to The Big Album Show with Paul Dillon and Dan O'Neill. Hello and welcome to The Big Album Show. I'm Dan.
And I'm Paul.
It was the year that soccer hooligans rioted in Lansdowne Road. Jack Charlton retired and Ireland voted to allow divorce. That same year, Whipping Boy released their stunning album Heartworm. Recorded between September and November 1994 in Windmill Lane, the album included tracks such as Twinkle, When We Were Young, and We Don't Need Nobody Else. It's an album held in high regard by many real music fans, and new generations have discovered it through the years since its release. As a record, it's emotional, it's powerful, it's timeless, and it's about to be reissued on double vinyl and CD, featuring a number of B-sides and demos. Whipping Boy consisted of Ferghal McKee on lead vocals, Paul Page on guitar, Myles McDonnell on bass, and Colm Hassett on drums. Today, we're absolutely thrilled to have Whipping Boy guitarist Paul Page on the show. How's it going, Paul? Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Dan. Hi, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
Paul, you're very, very welcome onto the Big Album Show. And it has to be said, this album for music fans is a thing of legend. And it's held so close to the hearts of so many music fans. And one of the reasons I know that is because I'm one of these people who started hunting out CDs in secondhand stores at the time when everybody started giving their CDs to secondhand stores, right? And the 90s, all those 90s albums were there. Spice Girls, Oasis, Blur, U2. I never once saw a secondhand copy of Heartworm available in a secondhand record store, because I think the fans of this album get it and they keep it and they return to it again and again and again. Why, if you look back at that, when you were making this record, were you aware of the good thing that you were onto and how big this album was going to become for you?
I suppose no. The short answer to that is no. I mean, we knew we had a bunch of really good songs, and we knew we had the bones of a very good album. But if you had said to me back then, in 25 years' time, people would still be listening, still be talking about the record, I probably would have said you're mad. It's one of those great mysteries as to how the album has, I suppose, endured for so many people, and I can't really explain it. By all accounts, it was a commercial failure at the time. Let's be blunt. It didn't sell in the kind of quantities that a major record label would expect. But somehow it's kind of hung on in there, and people have kept the name alive and kept talking about it and kept listening. And I suppose 26 years on now, we're about to reissue it, and demand, and the interest in it, has been phenomenal. So it's a really heartening thing for us as a band to see that, because we'd no expectation that would be how things would pan out.
I think it's fair to say, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Paul, but there's no band out there quite like Whipping Boy, and Whipping Boy are quite like no other band. And I mean, for me, one of the takes that I have on it, one of the reasons why this album is so close to so many music fans' hearts, is that it sounded completely and utterly different to anything that was released in that mid-90s period. And I mean, just looking back at the videos on YouTube, there's a great one on the Kenny live show. Do you remember this one? And Kenny's there and he's got the classic 90s suit, and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Whipping Boy," and on you come, and the lyrics, it's Twinkle, and you have that intro, and then the band kicks in, and then Fergal's lyrics kick in. I mean, I'd say there was nothing on Kenny Live like that before or after.
Yeah, and there was around the same time we were on the Late Late Show as well. And one of the things when you watch that video back is the audience look vaguely terrified. Fergal walks out onto the floor and eyeballs a couple of people in the front row, and you can see people, they're almost scrambling to try and get further back to a back row. It's without actually doing it. I think it was quite a dark album. I suppose there was always an unsettling element to us as a band live. It was just something that was there right from the very beginning, before Heartworm was even, conceived. As a band starting out, there was that energy and that kind of, it's hard to describe, but Fergal as a frontman had a way of really unsettling an audience and making them feel uncomfortable in a way that was both thrilling and scary. It's hard, if that makes sense. And I suppose, on shows like the Late Late Show and the Pat Kenny Show, it did stand out. That kind of music, it was quite brutal, quite forceful, and yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if that's a reason why it's endured, but I do think it had a unique quality to it for the time. Britpop was all the rage in the UK at the time as well, and that's been cited by some as one of the reasons why maybe it wasn't as successful, because it really didn't fit in with the Britpop sound and the Britpop ethos, the kind of whole laddish culture. We weren't a band that fell into that in any way. So yeah, it is still hard to explain why it has endured, and I don't think it's dated like some of the music from that era has, where you can really pin it down and say, yeah, that came from Britpop, or that was from the baggy era, or that was grunge. It straddles a few different areas, I think.
Definitely. And, when you think of the other bands in that Britpop kind of movement, I suppose you'd call it, you think of influences on their music, like, the Beatles, the Kinks, the Small Faces, those kind of things. When I listen to your music and this album, I hear bands coming through, in terms of your influences, such as maybe I hear elements of the Pixies, maybe Sonic Youth, maybe Dinosaur Jr., and Pavement. Were they the kind of bands you were listening to around this period?
Yeah, to be honest, a lot of the bands you've cited there would have been bands we listened to when we were starting off. So early Sonic Youth was a huge influence on us. Bands like Big Black, Pixies, early Pixies, they were all real big influence. But by the time we got to Heartworm, to be honest, we were still listening to music, but we didn't feel it was, the music we were making was as influenced by those bands. That we probably were a little bit kind of generic for our first few records. We were kind of copying bands, whereas when we got to Heartworm, I think we found our voice as a band. As musicians, we kind of had worked our way and stumbled our way to a point where we were kind of making music that sounded like Whipping Boy, rather than sounding like all of the influences that we had, that we've kind of consumed at the beginning. Because when we started out, we just were glad to pick up guitars and get into a room and make a noise. That was thrilling for us. And we did 8 bands like Sonic Youth to a large degree. I remember one great review of Submarine that said, buy Submarine and get Sister and Evil free, which I thought was very good. But yeah, I think by that stage, by the stage of Heartworm, we'd shed a lot of those influences and found some kind of a voice of our own.
On each episode of our show, we ask our guests to pick 3 songs on the album that kind of mean the most to them, or stand out to them off the top of their head. I know you could pick maybe a different 3 songs on any other given day, but are there could you give us kind of one by one an insight into 3 songs off the album that stand out to you?
Yeah, sure. I suppose the song that I think really defines us as a band would have been "We Don't Need Nobody Else." It was written at a time when I suppose the band were at a really low ebb. We'd released Submarine. We were back on the circuit playing the same shows around Ireland and in Dublin, and things seemed to have stagnated. And I suppose at that point, we were questioning whether there was a future for the band. And I think "We Don't Need Nobody Else" was one of the 4 songs that we wrote in that post-Submarine period where we felt we were onto something. And I think there's a certain defiance about the chorus, that line, "We don't need nobody else." I mean, the song's about a lot of things, touches on a lot of things, but that line, for me, it was kind of our anthem, in that, we were saying as a band, that's all we need. We get back together, we start from scratch, and we go again. So that would be one. I always liked "Morning Rise." I think the string arrangements on "Morning Rise," it showcased another side, a more tender side to the band. Myles was a really talented in terms of arranging strings and like he had a big role to play in that song. So that's one I really like as well. And I think "When We Were Young" is a song that, Ferghal wrote most of the lyrics, but that was one song where we collectively wrote that together. And we wrote it on the basis of, I don't know if you've heard the Phil Lynott version we have of When We Were Young. It's basically we were asked to do a Phil Lynott memorial gig, and we were so bad at doing cover versions. We said, let's write a piece of music and use one of Phil Lynott's poems. So he has a poem called Shades of a Blue Orphanage. And it's just this brilliant piece of writing about, you know, growing up and, you know, some of the people and places from his childhood. So we put that to the music, played the gig, and then we said that music is too good for us to throw out. Let's write a song like Shades of a Blue Orphanage, but put our own lyrics on it. And it's you know, it's a collective. We all chipped in with some of the lines there. So they would probably be the 3 songs I would choose from Heartworm.
I think they're incredible choices. And funny, when I think of Morning Rise, right, I actually, and this is just my opinion, I could be completely wrong, but it stands out to me as one of the lesser guitar driven songs, if you know what I mean, because it's kind of an acoustic guitar. I think it's effectively playing kind of chords throughout rather
Absolutely,
than
yeah.
And the fact that you've picked that kind of brings home to me something I think about your guitar playing, which is that as looking at you as a guitarist, I always think that you're wonderful at serving the songs. You don't seem to kind of show off like some guitarists, but at the same time, your riffs are absolutely wonderful and completely kind of intertwine with the rest of the band and Fergal's voice to produce something magical. And I think When We Were Young is a great example of that, where you have, you know, your relatively clean guitar for the verse. I suppose I kind of, you know, quiet, loud dynamics in the song, but then the kind of staccato guitar playing for the chorus. I think you're a remarkable guitarist in that regard.
Thanks a million. I think you're right in one respect there. You know, I was never a showy guitarist. There was 2 reasons why. One, I probably couldn't play as well as some of those guitarists that can show off. But 2, I did always think that everything we did as a band musically was there to serve the song. And, you know, like things like guitar solos didn't interest me. All the people I loved as guitarists growing up weren't showy guitars. Like I'm thinking of people like Will Sargent of Echo and the Bunnymen, really elegant guitar lines that, you know, they didn't overwhelm a song, they didn't take over a song, they were just there, and they bridged the gap so nicely between verse and chorus. So he would be a prime example of a guitarist that I loved. And I suppose, you know, as a guitarist, that's all I wanted to do, was to use textures and sounds to make the song sound as good as possible.
It's remarkable choices, incredible choices, as Dan said. I really love When We Were Young. I mean, I think that the guitar sound in it, it's like a victory march for me. It's like a victory song, you know, the introduction to it. And the lyrics are just incredible and quite wistful as well. And maybe there's that melancholy line in it, you know, what might have been, what might have been. It's almost a little bit, Paul, like it's like the band almost, what might have been, because, you know, this is a sort of record where the fans form this relationship with the band and become a kind of an extension of it. So people start reading into all these things. I always loved We Don't Need Anybody Else as well. And one of the reasons for that is, yes, you can see how it's about the band, but also the bit about Bono. I mean, years before anyone had a go at Bono, you guys had a go at Bono. And I mean, at the time, I mean, I remember it very, very well. There was a bit of a taboo in that, you know, they built portholes for Bono because so he could gaze out across the bay and sing about mountains and, hey, you are what you own in this world. I mean, you weren't exactly playing for popularity in 1995 in a way, were you?
Well, that story, I think the story behind that, you know, we weren't actually having a pop at YouTube. That's based on an actual experience. Fergal managed, and we still haven't worked out how to get into Bono's house when Bono wasn't there. Now, a friend of you know, one of the road crew of U2 was a friend of Fergal's, and he got him in. And the reason that line came about was Fergal was in the toilet, and he realized that they'd built the windows really low, and they were porthole type windows. So that's where that came from. But we weren't really having a pop at them, and people have interpreted as that. But I have a lot of respect for U2.
Yeah.
You know, now and as a kid, they were a band I loved. Like as I was growing up, I was at Croke Park to see them. So, you know, I have huge respect for them, and they paved the way for so many bands, you know, that came after them. But yeah, it's just a funny story, and Fergal had a really good way, a really eloquent way of putting those kind of little observations into a song, and yeah, it's a line that's definitely piqued people's interest. All right.
Myself and Dan are in the same boat as you when it comes to Bono, and we're willing to, nail our colours to the mast on that one any day of the week. But just one of the other things, you didn't mention it in your top three, but for me, The Natural is just a stunning piece of music, and Fergal's speaking voice in it, and it's the same way when you listen to the interviews of his speaking voice. His speaking voice alone is terrific, never mind his singing voice. But the lyrics on that one, I mean, again, they're so, it touches on mental health, and 26 years on, almost, mental health is it's a common topic of conversation. Still not enough, but it's talked about a lot more. It's certainly, you didn't hear lyrics like that committed to record in the mid-90s.
No, and I mean, my reaction when the first time Fergal walked into the rehearsal room, and we'd been playing around with this piece of music, and he just stood up, and in this almost one take monologue went through that. We, at the end of it, we were just stunned, and we never tried to second guess or dig too deep with Fergal's lyrics. Some of them are based on personal experience, some of them would have been based on observations and things that were going on in our lives at the time, like songs like Personality, again, one that was kind of collectively written. Name check some of the people and places that we were hanging out at the time, and people we were with at the time. But A Natural was one of those, moments for the band where we just thought, wow, that's something special. And I actually forgot that when you asked about the three songs, that would definitely be up there. It's one that I've it's very close to my heart as well. And it's, I suppose his spoken voice, he's got such a rich tone, in a similar way like Nick Cave and so Lou Reed had that thing where the voice alone was enough to command and make you listen. And I think Fergal had that. It was one of his really definable qualities, I think, about him.
Yeah, a fantastic voice, and so kind of quintessentially Dublin as well. He sings from the place you were in, as opposed to kind of trying to sound like an American band or anything like that. It's incredible. And one of the things we also do on the show is do a quick fire round of questions, right? Now, some of them are completely daft, maybe, but we'll see how you get on, right?
Okay.
So I'm gonna throw questions at you, and I want you to kind of think as fast as you can. Now the answers can be as long as you want. We have as much time as you can give us.
Okay.
But I'll just throw them at you, right? So first of all, Blur or Oasis?
Oasis.
Okay, Cork or Kerry?
Cork.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Okay, Spice Girls or All Saints?
Spice Girls.
Okay, why?
We met the Spice Girls at an Irma Awards years ago, when they were like just starting out, and we were introduced. So obviously that little memory, I'm going to go for Spice Girls every time.
Hey, these are the stories we're here for, Night in or night out?
At my age, it's night in nearly all the time.
GAA or soccer?
Soccer.
Yeah.
A lot of big GAA house in terms of the kids play GAA, and but I'm big soccer fan. Yeah,
you must be celebrating Bo's recent win.
I certainly was. I was there for all of the European games. Fantastic night. They're doing really well, in Europe. It's been brilliant run.
Have you got any hidden talents?
Have I got any hidden talents? I suppose I think I can write reasonably well.
And why do you hide that talent?
Because nobody's interested in anything I write.
Favorite album of all time, apart from Heartworm?
Favorite album of all time? Geez, that's a tough one. I would probably go with the Velvet Underground's first album. I just think it's probably not the best songs, but the biggest impact as an album. It's one of those seminal albums that just, again, sounds really different and was confrontational. The lyrics, everything about it, I love.
Favorite dinner?
Geez, I remember when I'd be asked that back in the 80s, chips would always feature, but I better not say that now. I like salmon in a creamy sauce and pasta. How's that?
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And the final one of these kind of quick round questions is your biggest regret.
My biggest regret. Do I have any really big regrets? I suppose one regret I could put forward is we got to play with Lou Reed, but in playing with Lou Reed, the European tour, we pulled out of an American tour, which was to be our first American tour. And it was definitely a bad move for the band. The American label went cold on us immediately after that. This was right at the beginning, and they had got this lined up. We were touring with a band called Stabbing Westward, who were on Sony at the time, and we'd agreed to do it, but then we got offered Lou Reed in Europe, and that was it. American label didn't want to know, so bit of a regret there.
But man, how can you turn down Lou Reed at the same time?
Exactly. Yeah, and exactly. And when you say was it a regret, I actually don't regret doing the Lou Reed tour, but it's definitely one that probably impacted how things went with the band. So.
And what was it like, you know, kind of emotionally for you as a young man touring with one of your idols? It
was unbelievable. It was a dream come true. And I've said this before, like we'd heard all the stories about Lou Reed being grumpy, being very difficult to work with, and we were expecting, we heard he ran a tight ship, everything, no alcohol, nothing. The first gig was in London, and we came off stage after playing, walked up to the dressing room, and Lou and his band were outside the dressing room, and Lou introduced himself and the band, every one of us, and we were like, couldn't believe this. No headline band had ever even spoken to us before this, and here's our idol, there to greet us. And the funny thing is, we told them this later in the tour. We got to play with Sterling Morrison and Mo Tucker in the Bag It In years before that. So it was the tour, the three of the four original members of the Velvet Underground. We never got John Cale though, unfortunately.
Amazing.
It's some of the comments that we got when we were doing on the build up to the show. We got lots of comments from lots of fans, and so much love for the band and the album. Somebody was saying, a guy called Tony contacted us to say that he was at the Lou Reed Whipping Boy gig in the Point in Dublin.
That's right. Yeah.
I think he said 95, Paul.
Yeah, it could have been 95 or 96. Yeah.
And he said hands down, Whipping Boy were way better. So it's just it's funny the memories that people have and what they get in touch with you and what stands out so many years on from that. I wanted to say to you, one of the things was we got so much, and thanks to everyone for their comments and for everyone who's contacted us about this album in particular. One comment from Hannah was, Paul, that she loved this album and still listened to it 25 years on, but found it difficult because of the male anger in some of the lyrics. Is that something that would resonate with you, or have you heard that before?
We would have been asked back in 95 when the album came out. Obviously, We Don't Need Nobody Else, and the line in that song, we would have been asked about that. It doesn't, I don't see it. If you think about any art form, if you think about music, you think about literature, you think about, an artist, the artist doesn't necessarily have to be, I suppose, recounting the experience as it happened to them. There, it could be observations, it could be, something that they're, I suppose, just experiences that they've come across. I mean, in terms of domestic violence, I think that line, domestic violence, is a massive issue now. But back then, it was very much an issue that nobody talked about. Yeah. So when, even a line like that in a song, it drew attention and people were a little bit taken aback by it. But as a child, I grew up in an area where domestic violence, I witnessed it. I witnessed it at home, and it's something when Ferghal put that line in, I just thought it was important that it stayed in, because it's something that we had to confront. It's something we had to talk about, and unfortunately, it hasn't gone away. And you see that horrific case this week with that young girl. I mean, it's just horrific, really, beyond words. It is an issue. I don't think at the time, I didn't get any sense that was something that we were dealing with as a band, or Ferghal was dealing with. You know, we were just writing songs about experiences, personal experiences, and things we observed and saw happening around us. So, you know, that's the only thing I can really say to that.
It's interesting. I mean, when you cast your mind back to that period, Paul, you will remember, I don't know if you remember The Family. It was a Roddy Doyle TV show that came out a few years before that on RTE, which dealt with domestic violence, which I think would have been one of the first sort of big TV shows that would have dealt with that. You had Roddy Doyle's book, of course, and The Woman Who Walked Into Doors, which again was heavily about that. And then you had this, and again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, you couldn't imagine another band committing those sort of lyrics to record. And I think that's the great testament to Whipping Boy for me, is that they did something so brave, and they didn't do something, you didn't do something simply to get acclaim. I mean, you go to any secondhand record store now, you're going to see tons of Ocean Colour Scene records. I mean, there was loads of bands that sold more than you, as you said in the beginning. But what you did was create an album that's authentic and form this emotional connection. And I suppose one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, what do you see as the legacy of the record? Because, I mean, again, somebody got in touch with us on social media and said, when they hear Fontaines DC, they think Whipping Boy. I mean, what do you think the legacy of Heartworm is?
It's difficult for me to say. You know, people have mentioned bands like Fontaines DC and Murder Capital, and have said they can draw a direct lineage back to Whipping Boy. They can see that the influence there. I don't know if those guys were influenced, but they're good bands in their own right. They, you know, really good bands. I suppose I'd like to think that Heartworm was an album that we were, you know, it was an honest album. We wrote an album that was true to ourselves. We didn't go and sign to a major label and then try and tone down what we were about, which I think is something that you see happen. And it happened to a lot of my favorite bands as well. They signed to a major label, and the next record they put out is this toned down, radio friendly, I suppose, anodyne sounding record. I don't think we did that. I think Heartworm was probably more ferocious. It was probably more honest than anything we'd put down before in terms of recorded output. So I think if there's any legacy, is that we recorded an album that we, you know, it was true to who we were and what we were about. It didn't succeed, but in another way it did succeed, in that people are still talking about it. People still cite it as an album that means a lot to them.
Do you play much guitar yourself these days, Paul?
I don't these days, no, unfortunately. You know, I did go through a period after the band split up where I didn't want to even look at a guitar. It was a very difficult time for something that had, I suppose, meant so much to us. And it's not just to me. I know how much the band meant to the rest of the guys. I mean, it was difficult, and we all had to deal with it in our own way. And I did go through a spell after that where I felt a bit lost when the band split, because you don't just lose the three guys that were in the band. The whole network of people that you've lived with for the guts of, you know, 12, 13 years, they just all disappear. So I did find it difficult, and I never really got back into guitar or wanted to play with another band. Whipping Boy were more, you know, my bands. They were the only band I ever wanted to be with, and, you know, it was never a question I'd look to play with anyone else.
Well, Paul, the album has been reissued, and so it is back out there again. Fans rediscovering it, maybe discovering it for the first time. I have a feeling that in the same way as, you know, albums like Nevermind and Nirvana and other albums that we've covered here in the Big Album Show, that generation after generation find them and discover something new. I think that's what's going to happen with this album. Have you any thoughts as the album is reissued, and as orders are flying in for the reissued Heartworm? Any thoughts now of where this record goes from here?
I'm just delighted people have got the opportunity again to get a copy of it, because it has been off the shelves for a long time. I mean, that was the real goal with getting it out there, and I was always surprised that Columbia or Sony didn't try and reissue it, because they would have seen the interest was there 10 years, 15 years, but they didn't seem to have an interest in putting it out. So for me, I'm really happy that we're doing it with Needle Mythology. They put together really nice packages. They're very meticulous, and we could have rushed it out for the anniversary and just put, you know, the album, bog standard album out, but they were very insistent that they wanted to do it right. So it's got some really good bonus material, liner notes from Colm O'Callaghan. He's written a really wonderful essay that goes with the album, and I think fans, when they get it, they will be, you know, they'll be very happy, because it's remastered, but it hasn't lost any of the essence of the original Heartworm. I listened to the two back to back. I've got the test pressings, and I'm always a little bit skeptical about the whole remastering process. You know, I'm not sure how much it ever adds. So I was kind of glad it hasn't changed it dramatically, because, you know, I've heard of botched remastering jobs where you know, the album sounds much weaker, but it certainly doesn't. It sounds like the album we released back in '95.
Can you imagine the reaction from the fans if they felt this album had been changed or transformed in a negative way? It wouldn't be good.
No, it certainly wouldn't.
Paul, we wish you all the very, very best as the album is reissued 26 years on. What a remarkable record! What a remarkable group! We hope that you've enjoyed coming on the show and to discuss Heartworm. If anybody has any questions or has any comments, please get in touch with us at The Big Album Show. We'd love to hear from you. We always do. Just tag us, and please remember to listen back to our other pods if you enjoyed this one. But from me, Paul.
And me, Dan.
It's been a pleasure. And thanks again, Paul, and very, very best of luck.
Thanks a million, guys.
You're listening to The Big Album Show with Paul and Dan. Please remember to subscribe, hit like, and remember to follow us on our social media platforms at The Big Album Show.